That's been our news and also our commodity prices for solanum to barosum. I like the scientific names of some of these products. But today, we are discussing matters to do with our indigenous crops. And in studio, we have Dr. Carlo Fada, who's the global lead at CGIAR and also research director at Biodiversity International. Quite an extensive experience, Dr. Carlo, when it comes to research. And the goal is to make Kenya and the whole world food secure. Talk to me about this aspect of indigenous foods, indigenous crops. I mean, is the world forgetting where we are coming from? What exactly is going on?
I think necessarily not the world. Certainly Africa is. If you think that the majority of the crops that are kind of forgotten or neglected, they come from Africa globally. And so it means that it's not, I mean, Africa obviously has its own richness of crops and edible food, but it means that other continents, other countries are more interested in researching and studying those crops.
Okay.
And that tells us also something. But before I answer your question, let me tell you why it matters and why it is important. So let me put it in the context of what is happening to the globe, and Kenya particularly. I think that you are very much aware that there are multiple crises in the world. One is climate change. We've heard before from the TV on climate smart agriculture. And climate is affecting the way we farm. Probably since, I don't know, in the past 10 years, there has always been a crisis, being a prolonged drought, being a flood, and then you have the locust, and all of these climate crises that is affecting agriculture. And then we have nutrition crisis. If we take Kenya alone, and this has multiple dimensions. If you take Kenya alone, 60% of the people in urban areas are obese. And as you know, diseases related to obesity like diabetes are on the increase to the point that they are a public health emergency in this country. You have 20%, 30% of our children, majority of which in rural areas, that are either stunted or underweight. That means that on the one side, the obese people eat too much. On the other hand, you have people, children in particular, that eat too little. These are two faces of the same medal, if you want. It's a nutritional crisis that has multiple dimensions. You have the land degradation and the loss of biodiversity. About 70% of agricultural land in Kenya is degraded to a certain point, majority of which is in arid and semi-arid land, but also high fertile areas are actually degraded. And so you may ask, so why are you telling all of this? What does it have to do with the for neglected crops and the traditional crops? Well, it has, because a majority of all these crises are because of agriculture and because of the way we farm, because of the way we produce our food. We tend to use, we tend again to reduce the amount of crops that we eat. We rely on maize, some nyama choma, more or less that's it, very little fruits and vegetables. And that is why we have obesity. And that is why we have micronutrient deficiency on the other hand. And we tend to eat too much of it. So somehow the fact that the fact that we tend to produce so much of these staple crops is what affects our health in the long run. The way we produce them by using chemical fertilizer, pesticides, and I'm not advocating against, but what I'm saying is that sometimes it's not sustainable. And so that pollutes our river, it pollutes the waters, it pollutes the land. And sometimes there are residues in the food that we eat which can cause additional diseases. And then we have the climate. Agriculture is responsible for 30% plus of greenhouse gases emission. So on the one hand, agriculture suffers from climate change because the crops lose productivity. For example, it is predicted that there will be less production of maize in Kenya because of climate change, between 15 and 25%. And on the other hand, agriculture keeps emitting greenhouse gas that cause the climate change crisis. So the idea is that, my idea, at least the type of research that I do, is can we produce food and consume food differently in ways that we are in better health and in ways that we reduce the damage that we do to our planet.
Okay.
And this is where these traditional crops come into place. Now, when we talk traditional crops, a lot of questions are about, oh, but then you're looking backward. Finally, we are now embracing modern agriculture. Why you want to push us back? This is not what I want, in fact.
Okay.
Because what I think is that it's not possible, simply. When I was born, in Kenya, there were 11 million people, and now there are 55 million people. So this simple number tells us a story that we cannot simply go back and do the way our ancestors are doing. And we need to modernize. We need to think of how we can bring those traditional crops into picture with a modern touch, with something that can use the discovery like digital agriculture, the improvement in genetics, etc., to serve the purpose of improving agricultural production, improving health and people and planet health through the use of these crops.
Definitely. And I'm glad you've set that foundation. Now we went to take a short break. When you come back, we are building on that. And the question you've asked is, how can we do so? Because the how is very important. Utilize our indigenous crops to bridge this gap, because we're seeing extremities. Not only in climate change, you've rightly put it, even in our food consumption, there is a lot of waste on one side, there is deficiency on the other side. How do we bridge that and utilize our traditional crops?